Have you ever rehearsed a difficult conversation in your head for days or even weeks without actually having it? You know those imaginary conversations where somehow you deliver the perfect speech, the other person immediately realizes you're completely right, apologizes sincerely, and everybody grows emotionally in under 5 minutes? Yeah, real life usually doesn't go quite like that. Most people do not avoid hard conversations because they don't care. They avoid them because difficult conversations trigger fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of hurting someone, fear of being misunderstood, or fear of losing connection. But avoidance has a cost. And today we're talking about why difficult conversations feel so emotionally threatening and how avoiding them often creates even bigger problems over time. Welcome to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, where we explore the keys to unlocking your full potential and living your best life. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. Whether you're looking to make a breakthrough, overcome a challenge, or simply live with greater clarity, joy, and purpose, you'll find the tools and inspirations you need right here. So let's start your journey towards personal mastery and growth right now. Welcome back to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, your go-to resource for practical tips, insightful research, and inspiring stories to help you unlock your full potential. I'm your host, Jose Johnson, and I am an expert in the fields of mindfulness, mindset, and peak performance, and I'm so excited to have you here with me today. Now, over the past month, we've been exploring the hidden psychological patterns shaping our emotional lives. We've talked about unrealistic expectations in relationships. We've explored the second arrow and how the mind amplifies suffering. We discussed the stories we tell ourselves and how emotional environments affect our mindset. Today, we're bringing all these ideas together through one very human experience: avoiding difficult conversations. Because honestly, communication is where emotional intelligence either becomes real or remains theoretical. And the conversations that we avoid often become the emotional burdens that we carry. So today we're going to explore why difficult conversations feel so threatening, how avoidance creates emotional debt, the stories we tell ourselves about conflict, and a practical framework for handling difficult conversations with greater clarity, emotional regulation, and courage. So let's dive in. Now, one of the most important things to understand is this: your nervous system often interprets social tension as a threat to safety and belonging. Human beings are deeply wired for connection. For most of human history, social rejection could genuinely threaten survival. So the brain evolved to become highly sensitive to criticism, exclusion, conflict, judgment, and relational tension, which means difficult conversations don't just feel uncomfortable emotionally. They can feel threatening neurologically. Now, this is why some people will avoid a 5-minute conversation for 6 months. And honestly, for some people, sending the text, "Hey, can we talk?" feels emotionally equivalent to preparing for a cage match. The amygdala activates, stress hormones increase, the nervous system prepares for danger, and once emotional activation rises, people often default into one of several patterns: avoidance, defensiveness, shutting down, people-pleasing, emotional dumping, or aggression. Not necessarily because they're immature, but because their nervous system is trying to protect them from discomfort. Now, understanding this doesn't excuse unhealthy communication, but it does help explain why difficult conversations feel so emotionally charged. Your brain is trying to avoid emotional pain. The problem is, avoiding discomfort often creates larger discomfort later. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is believing avoidance eliminates problems. Usually, it just postpones them, and that often makes them heavier. Avoidance creates emotional debt, and emotional debt tends to collect interest. At first, the issue might be small. "Hey, this bothered me a little." But after weeks or months of avoidance, suddenly the conversation becomes, I've apparently been silently building a mental documentary about your behavior since February. Now resentment has entered the picture, and resentment thrives in unspoken spaces. This happens constantly in relationships, families, friendships, workplaces, leadership, and even within ourselves. People avoid setting boundaries, expressing their needs, addressing disrespect, clarifying their expectations, apologizing, or simply having honest conversations. And over time, the emotional pressure builds. What could have been a small adjustment becomes emotional distance, passive aggression, frustration, resentment, burnout, or relational breakdown. Now, avoidance doesn't eliminate tension, it stores it. And eventually, stored tension leaks out somewhere else. That's why some people explode emotionally over something that seems small. See, often it's not about that one moment, it's accumulated emotional debt finally overflowing. All right, let's go a little deeper because many people are not just avoiding conversations, they're actually reacting to the stories they learned about conflict itself. Some people grew up in environments where conflict meant yelling, tension, slammed doors, emotional chaos, criticism, or emotional withdrawal. So now their nervous system hears, we need to talk, and immediately prepares for an emotional tornado warning. Other people learn stories like conflict is bad, speaking up is selfish, my needs don't matter, keeping the peace is more important than honesty. If people are upset with me, I've done something wrong. Now, those narratives become emotional conditioning, and later in life, those unconscious stories quietly shape communication patterns. Some people become chronic people pleasers. Some avoid confrontation entirely, and some suppress emotions until they explode. Some communicate indirectly and hope others magically get the hint, which, by the way, almost never works as well as people hope it will. Human beings are not mind readers, and honestly, one of the most emotionally mature things a person can learn is that healthy conflict is not the same thing as emotional chaos. Disagreement does not automatically equal danger. Sometimes difficult conversations are actually acts of respect because honest communication creates clarity, and clarity creates healthier relationships. Now, let's make an important distinction. Healthy communication is not the same thing as emotional discharge because sometimes people think, I'm just being honest. But in reality, they're emotionally unloading without regulation. Honesty without regulation often becomes emotional shrapnel. Now, there's a difference between expressing emotions and setting your emotions on fire and handing them to someone else. Timing matters, tone matters, self awareness matters, and emotional regulation matters. Difficult conversations go better when the goal is understanding, clarity, growth, or resolution, not emotional victory. And honestly, many conversations become destructive because people enter them trying to win, punish, release frustration, or prove superiority. Now, that usually creates defensiveness instead of connection. This is why emotional regulation before communications matters so much. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is to pause long enough for your nervous system to settle before speaking. Not to suppress emotion, but to communicate more intentionally, because emotional intensity does not automatically improve communication quality. So let's make this practical. I'm going to give you a simple framework for approaching difficult conversations more effectively. And I'm going to call this the T.A.L.K framework because difficult conversations usually go poorly not because people are bad, but because they're emotionally activated, unclear, reactive, or defensive. And this framework helps to create more awareness, regulation, and intentionality before and during communication. So let's start with T. Think clearly. Before the conversation, ask yourself, what is actually bothering me? What outcome am I hoping for? Am I seeking resolution or just emotional release? This step matters because emotional activation often reduces clarity. When the nervous system becomes highly emotional, the brain tends to shift into threat response thinking. People begin exaggerating, generalizing, assuming intent, or mentally preparing for battle. That's why emotionally charged conversations often drift away from the actual issue. Suddenly, the discussion is no longer, this specific behavior bothered me. Now it becomes, you always do this, or you never listen. The brain starts broadening the conflict. Thinking clearly helps prevent emotional flooding from hijacking the conversation. It helps separate facts from assumptions, patterns from exaggerations, and actual concerns from accumulated frustration. Clarity reduces unnecessary emotional escalation. And honestly, difficult conversations usually go better when we stop treating them like courtroom dramas. Most relationships do not need cross-examination. Moving on to A, acknowledge emotions. Recognize your emotional state before speaking. Are you angry, anxious, hurt, defensive, embarrassed, overwhelmed, or just emotionally triggered? Awareness matters because unrecognized emotions often control communication without us realizing it. Now, this is one reason mindfulness is so important. Mindfulness creates awareness before reaction. Instead of unconsciously becoming the emotion, you begin noticing, I'm emotionally activated right now. That awareness alone can dramatically improve communication quality. Research in emotional regulation shows that naming emotions can actually reduce amygdala activation. And that's why the phrase name it to tame it is so powerful, because emotional awareness helps shift the brain out of pure reactivity. Sometimes taking a few breaths, a short walk, or even a brief pause before responding can completely change the trajectory of a conversation. And honestly, many difficult conversations are not ruined by honesty. They're ruined by dysregulation. L, listen actively. Communication is not only expression, it's understanding. And honestly, many people are not truly listening during difficult conversations. They're simply waiting for their turn to defend themselves. But active listening changes the emotional tone of communications dramatically. Because when people feel heard, their nervous system often becomes less defensive. And that's important. Feeling understood helps reduce perceived social threat. Now, active listening does not mean automatically agreeing. It means becoming curious enough to understand the other person's perspective before immediately preparing your rebuttal. Sometimes asking questions like, can you help me understand what you meant? What did that experience feel like for you? What do you need from me moving forward? They can completely shift the energy of a conversation. Curiosity often de-escalates defensiveness faster than argument. K, keep moving forward. The goal of healthy communication is not emotional domination. It's movement. It's growth, resolution, clarity, understanding. So ask yourself, what would moving forward constructively look like? That question changes the emotional posture of the conversation because many people unconsciously approach conflict trying to win, punish, prove superiority, or release emotional tension. But healthy communication focuses on progress rather than victory. And honestly, relationships tend to improve when people stop asking, how do I win the conversation? And start asking, how do we move forward in a healthier way? That shift changes everything because emotionally mature communication is not about defeating people. It's about improving connection, clarity, and understanding whenever possible. Hey there, feeling stuck? Spinning your wheels? Are you ready for a breakthrough? Well, then you need to hear this because I've got something that will supercharge your growth this year, and it's called the Mindset Makeover. Now, it's my new book and course that are designed to help you upgrade the mental software that drives your success. And inside, you're going to discover the mindsets that shape every decision, every habit, and every result. And you'll learn the science-backed tools to rewire your thinking for clarity, confidence, and unstoppable momentum. So whether you're aiming higher, trying to break free from old patterns, or finally stepping into that version of yourself that you know that you're capable of becoming, well, this is your launch pad. So don't wait. Head over to josejohnson.com/mindset to grab the book, join the course, or get both together. Again, that's josejohnson.com/mindset. And remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. And with the Mindset Makeover, you can make it something extraordinary. One of the greatest forms of emotional maturity is learning how to communicate honestly without becoming emotionally destructive. And that takes courage because difficult conversations create vulnerability. And vulnerability, it feels uncomfortable. But avoidance has a cost too. And honestly, many people are suffering not from the conversation they had, but from the conversation they never had. The apology that was never spoken, the boundary that was never expressed, the need that was never communicated, the truth that was never addressed. And over time, silence can quietly become suffering. Now, this doesn't mean that every thought needs to be verbalized. Wisdom still matters, timing still matters, discernment still matters. But healthy communication creates emotional freedom because clarity reduces confusion, honesty reduces resentment, and courageous communication often strengthens relationships far more than avoidance ever will. Look, difficult conversations are just part of being human. Conflict is inevitable, misunderstandings happen, needs change, boundaries matter, emotions rise. But avoiding difficult conversations does not protect relationships nearly as much as people think it does. Often it slowly weakens them. So this week, I want you to reflect on one question. What conversation have I been avoiding that might actually create greater peace, clarity, or freedom if I approached it with honesty and emotional maturity? Now, that question alone could change a relationship or even change your life. And so if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with someone who may need to hear it. And as always, please subscribe, follow, and leave a review because it truly helps us continue reaching more people with these conversations. And until next time, remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. So make it great. Thanks for tuning in. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional advice or treatment. While the content of this podcast is based on research and personal experience, everyone's situation is unique, and the advice given may not be applicable to all. Always consult a qualified professional before making significant changes in your life. The Personal Mastery and Growth podcast is recorded at the So Good Media Studios located in the Candy Factory, a co-working space in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.